A lot of what we're talking about is, the role and the vision of the CEO. And, no one's kind of been, a bigger mentor to me and kind of really talking about the future of where we're going and the industry's going than Rob. And, for any of you who work for a visionary CEO, I think you know what I'm talking about. I think it's all about, you walk out of there like you can like run through a wall or run through a building because Rob said you could do it. And I'm like, okay, I can run through that building. And we love him for that. So I just want to show a quick slide first because, a lot of what we're talking about is engagement. And, I think when we define engagement, yeah, you could advance it. This is kind of how I've seen it defined, You have to be happy about your current work environment, about the company mission, and you have to have some kind of liking for your coworkers to be engaged from an intranet benchmarking forum, so it must be official if they said it and they wrote it. But that said, I kind of was thinking about, what is the future of engagement? Like, what does it mean, and where is it going? And we're all here kind of trying to figure out, is it percentage points? We want to go from 90 to 95, 75 to 80. What do we want to do? And if you advance the slide, I found this in Harvard Business Review, and I think it's just fabulous. So I'm going to let you all read it, but I think it's great. So as you read it, I think it is about these thriving employees. And when we had GE here, they said to us, when I think about A players today, A players are tired. They've raised their hands. They've done more. They continue to do more, but they're tired. And, they want companies to hire more people. And I think that, the marketing challenge right now is about brand relevance. Right? The internal challenge is about uncertainty. Am I going to get more resources? Is this the new normal? What's going on? Where are we going? But I think this is really the goal. And, as we advance the slide, I think that what we're seeing right now is it's about competition to collaboration, which I find fascinating, especially in like retail brands where you're always in competition from store to store. But now it's about, wouldn't it be better if we can collaborate, if we all work together to collaborate? Kind of the Burger King, it's all about secrecy and the secret sauce, to now about transparency and how do we do open source and how do we do it. And then lastly, from the individual to community. And that's a lot of what people are talking about, is building these robust talent communities. So my last slide, Rob, as I introduce you, is the future is to innovate around leadership. And I'm going to read you Rob's bio because it's awesome, and I'm going to read it. Rob Quish, CEO of JWT Atlanta and JWT INSIDE. Rob has been at JWT for over 7 years and is a key leader in raising the bar for creative ideation and innovative execution across the worldwide agency network. He currently serves as the CEO of JWT Atlanta, overseeing operations run out of the Atlanta, Dallas, and Houston offices. Rob simultaneously acts as CEO of JWT INSIDE, an employee communications company that provides organizations with advertising and marketing. And we are thrilled to have you. And I promise that all of you will leave smarter than you are right now. You will all have a great laugh, and now there's no pressure, right? I mean, I didn't do anything there.
Good morning, everyone. Since Don King, there hasn't been a promoter like Ian. So raise your hand if you've ever gone through a merger or an acquisition. So interestingly, Ian was with a company that JWT acquired. How many years ago? 6 years ago, right before I think I got involved. And pardon? Right before your life changed. Well, that was when the twins were born. But what's amazing about Ian, so I'm going to just throw it back at you and embarrass you a little bit, but what's amazing about him is not only the fact that he came in through an acquisition or merger, but that he was able to kind of not only assume a new culture, because that's always the hardest thing, particularly in the advertising business, because we don't make stuff in terms of manufacturing. It's about people, and great companies are all built around great cultures. But he was not only able to kind of adapt, he became the brand, and he's, of course, our marketing guy, our promoter extraordinaire. But what really is amazing about him is he loves the company. He doesn't love me as much as it sounds like he does, and when it's time for his bonus, he really loves me. No, we're kidding. But he really loves the company, and it's because he loves the people. And you could ask any of our people around the country, he's undoubtedly the most beloved person in the organization. And leadership has nothing to do with that, but it has a lot to do with special people who really care about their work and the definition of engagement, which I love to bang on about, but it's not what I'm supposed to bang on about today, so I'm going to bang on about a few other thoughts. Well, yeah, believe me, if it wasn't, institutionally, it would have been privately by you. I taught him that. I said, record everything. I think I told that to John Windolf when he was my client at one point. That's why I hired him as president of JWT Inside. It's my way of getting back at clients. So for any clients who are here, you have a future at JWT. It's my way. Mike Zelliff, where's Mike? Colonel in the Marine Corps, exactly. Isn't it nice to have a colonel call you boss? I think my speech is done. It's great to see Mike and my friends at TNS. Mike, how many did we have last year when we had this collaborative session? About 8 heads of HR. I don't know if any of you were here who were here last year, but it was global HR directors, chief talent officers in a very provocative, open conversation, and I hope that's what I can instigate today. At least I hope I can wake people up, because I know you were all out last night, so it was nice of them to give me this time slot. Anyway, all right. So the obligation of leadership is the topic I wanted to talk about. And I'll start with maybe the first was a story, and I think it was probably a year and a half into my role at JWT, and some folks from GE came in, and it was just an introductory meeting, and they were asking, the first question they asked me was, does a leader have to be, let's see how I put it, do they need to be front and center in public for a company to be a top-tier talent factory? And I think what they're really saying is they had just gone through the blustery days of Jack Welch. Jeffrey Immelt was in, and he was vastly different. And so they were yearning for kind of the energy and charisma of Jack Welch, and yet they weren't finding it out of Jeff, and they didn't really know what to do, how to extract it out of him, or whether that was even appropriate. Was it really about Jeff being Jeff? And I'm sitting there saying, yeah, he's the CEO. Of course he needs to be highly visible, very articulate, confident and clear, energized and articulate to effectively lead the far-flung businesses, tens of thousands of employees of General Electric. Of course he does. It's interesting, too, if you start to think about Apple and obviously the sad loss of Steve Jobs, I doubt whether any of us think there's going to be a mass exodus of engineers at Apple, but you could certainly imagine a junior at Carnegie Mellon in engineering, and she could be wondering, are Apple's best days behind them? I wrote this before, by the way, Apple's market cap exceeded the size of Poland, which I think was yesterday. But you can't, honestly, you can't imagine someone going, I don't know, is it Google or is it, and start to wonder. And so that's some of the responsibilities, and imagine walking in the footsteps of Steve Jobs. IBM just passed their 100th anniversary, some of you may know, and I don't know if we have anyone from IBM here, but I was reviewing some of their celebratory notes, and there was a quote that I thought was really interesting from Sam Palmisano, who just stepped down as CEO, and it said, the basic philosophy, spirit, and drive of an organization have far more to do with its relative achievements than do technological or economic resources, organizational structure, innovation, and timing. All of these things weigh heavily in success, but they are, I think, transcended by how strongly the people in the organization believe in its basic precepts and how faithfully they carry them out. So these basic precepts and themes of IBM leaders, from Thomas Edison through Sam and now through Ginny Rometty today, they have consistently followed those themes and been great leaders and watched a company transform repeatedly. I'm going to show you just one of their films once in a while, not all the time, but more and more recently, you're seeing companies in their marketing actually celebrate their people as another expression of that level of leadership. So take a look at this film.
66% of new products have some kind of intelligence built in.
Refrigerators order groceries from the store.
Washing machines run when energy prices are lowest.
And dryers call for service before they break down. Air conditioners respond to local weather reports.
Software gives businesses new ways to connect to customers.
By making things smarter, life gets better.
That's what I'm working on.
I'm an IBMer.
I'm an IBMer.
I'm an IBMer.
Let's build a smarter planet.
So what's the role and responsibility of leadership in a company's talent strategy? And by this I mean divisional leadership, regional leadership, country leadership, but especially the global CEO. The only way a company like IBM can be as dynamic and adaptive a business that capitalizes on opportunities of the times is for leadership to offer this kind of dynamic view, to fuel a dynamic outlook among the organization. And that requires leaders to find their voice. They've got to craft their story, and the story needs to be told. So I'll tell you a little bit about the way I think of JWT Inside, because I think it's as much a metaphor for the responsibilities of people who have the jobs that you have, which is we're storytellers. And we help companies and leaders discover what we call their inside story, which you can probably see how we angled through that branding aspect right there. But it really is true that companies have inside stories, which has been summed up in our mind as a value proposition, an employee value proposition to employees, and I think of it as the DNA. I think the best way I characterize it is the lens by which you hire and fire it. Through that lens and that clarity of understanding, you can determine who gets promoted and who doesn't. It's kind of a give and a get, or what the company expects from you and what you as an employee can expect back, right? Because it's a two-way street, and I know you probably talked about that yesterday. So to discover that DNA, we have a technique that we use, and it's something we actually borrowed. It was in an article, coincidentally, that a friend of mine had written. I hadn't known about this article, and it's called The Four Truths of Storytelling. And Peter Guber is a big Hollywood producer and has grabbed a lot of Oscars, not last week, but certainly many, many in the past, from Batman to Color Purple, and the list goes on. And he created this architecture for what it takes to make a great story. So there's first the truth of, and think about this not only for a brand, but think about it for the artist. What's the truth of the teller? The truth about the company or product, what's in the history and so forth. What's the truth of the audience? What is it about that audience that you think you're going to be able to captivate? What makes them a special, unique, and distinctive group of people? What's the truth of the moment? And this is really important. What's happening today that may be unique? And as a result of understanding that, how will you be able to craft a story that's just right for right now? And then last, what's the truth of the mission? Because whether it's a great film like The Help or a great brand, you want to have some sense of purpose, right? Those are the ones, and if you think about it, these are the stories that you remember. The stories that have all of those components are the ones that are going to be retold. And I guess maybe a story isn't a story until it's retold. So we interrogate a company and we uncover the truths in these four areas. It's part of our strategic exercise. Then we make a creative leap to identify kind of a spine of the story. It's not necessarily a creative campaign, but it's basically that singular idea that captures the DNA. So I'll give you an example. For Bloomberg, I don't know how many of you know Bloomberg or been to Bloomberg offices. It's really an exceptional place. It's a thriving, and they love to consider themselves an uncorporation, where speed and action are the norm. Their audience, you can take a look at it and read around, but they're very curious, socially conscious, culturally hip. But the center square to me is really exceptionally brilliant in how it captured the truth of the company. And I remember when we presented it, Michael, we were there, and we presented it first to the chief talent officer. A brilliant woman, just came from Goldman Sachs, and she said, "That's it, that's us." She said, "This place is crazy. Every day I have to figure new things out." In part it was a frustration, and in part it was just a truth. But it's probably the best way to find the right people and weed out the wrong ones. And nothing, to me, the mark of success is something that is half scary and half inviting, because you don't want everybody working for you. You want the right people working for you. For the Marine Corps, when we do that, Mike, what's it say in the middle? Few the proud, or the elite warrior. Elite warrior, you're the point of the spear. That's going to turn a lot of people away. It's going to turn away 1/8 of 1%. Those are the people that are in Afghanistan right now. And clearly one that turns away, the right people. So from that, I'll show you just how it manifests itself in a creative theme, just because if I don't entertain you with some film, everyone's going to fall asleep because you're out. So Timothy's and his team's group brought that out in a creative idea for for Bloomberg. So figure it out is an internal mantra. And it's really not the way you'd entice people, but it's a strategic truth of the company. And from that, if you can play the next film, you'll see what we call kind of a creative manifesto. It's not an ad, or it doesn't go out to the public, but it helps demonstrate an idea that Bloomberg has adopted.
It takes an exceptional type of person to work at Bloomberg, a new and electric type of personality, people we like to call the new Type B. The new Type B is more than just one person. It's a movement, a living network on a mission. It's that freedom to achieve in a more effective career built on brilliance, drive, and agility. It's a new kind of leader for a company without walls, not just impatient with the problems of the world, but elbow deep, figuring it out. The new Type B is constantly advancing.
And it usually goes on a little bit longer than that, but that's fine. But having clarity in your ideas, even a really tight, very well-adopted proposition, or even some of the marketing materials for your internal and external prospective employees, does not replace the need for strong leadership. And I think a lot of companies believe that. Oh, well, we've got that. We've got, HR is pushing messaging out to our people, and we've got this beautiful campaign, and it's really true to who we are. I don't think that does that. And if you think about what we captured in Bloomberg, it was maybe as much capturing the DNA of Bloomberg, the man. And obviously, Mike's an incredibly smart, very driven guy with a great vision for a company that's constantly uncovering new information and then had a proprietary way to deliver that information to the world. He was kind of the original figure-it-outer. And for those who live in New York and watch the news, you could probably almost hear him saying, just go figure it out, would you? And I'm sure they hear that a lot in the halls of New York City government. But so let me digress for a minute, because it's always great to hear legends about leaders, and I have one about Mike. And we have to go back in time, and you'll understand in a moment. But by Mike's desk at Bloomberg, when he was still working there, imagine a very open plan like JWT, and he had a desk in the corner, and by his desk there was a piece of tape on the ground. And so when people would go to see him, they knew that if they were going to say, I couldn't figure it out, they stood on the far side of the tape, because that was as far as his phone would go when he threw it at him. For those younger people, actually, there used to be cords. I could probably find one in a picture on the internet. Google it, old phone, you'll see it. But I'll tell you another quick, funny story. Someone said, do you have any of those stories like the Kennedy one? I guess push that up. Am I doing that? There we go. This was a client of mine when I was far younger, and I remember hearing this story in the halls of Memphis. And it was that Fred, as you know, I'm sure you know the story, that he went to Yale. He had this idea for a new distribution system based on airplanes and delivery around the world, and he presented the paper at Yale, and he got a C. Yale today, by the way, says, well, a C means it can happen, trying to get those donations from Fred, I imagine. But, Fred went off and he built the organization, bought the planes, brought all Marine pilots in to fly the planes, and they were at a point in time where he had $300,000, which was about a third of the cash flow he needed for payroll in 2 weeks. And it was a Friday, and he didn't know what to do, so he got one of the pilots to bring him to Las Vegas. And he won big, and Federal Express is in business today. So that's the fearless attitude of a former Marine, the cowboy attitude of a fearless leader. His drive and never quit attitude was the infectious foundation of a unique culture that's thriving today. So the real question is, those are great stories, but what if you don't have Fred or you don't have Mike in the company? How do you sustain a company? And obviously there's something in the DNA of your leaders. There is a reason that they were selected, and it was not just about their skills and their resume. There's something in the DNA of those people that has helped them emerge to be the successes that they are. And their own special traits were deemed by many others to put them in those roles. Often the selection is about these intangibles. But the real question is, do those intangibles ever surface? Or do they come quickly enough? Is there a concerted effort to explain to the employees why this leader has the perfect combination of traits and intangibles to lead? And frankly, and I think this is the real truth, is the leader even self-aware enough to understand what she's got or bold enough to shed the spotlight on it? I think many leaders like Jeffrey Immelt are more reserved, and they believe actions speak louder than words, that time will tell. Well, you know what time tells? It tells time. Tick-tock, that's about it. And frankly, that's what the employees say. What's he doing up there? What's going on? When's change going to happen? Let's go. Come on, move, move. Tick-tock. So, like clockwork, every 3 years, the Marine Corps has a new leader. They're called the Commandant of the Marine Corps, appointed by the President to lead the force of elite warriors. I've met 3 of them, as well as a 4-star who became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Pete Pace. I think, Mike, you might have been with me. In the Marine Corps, leaders know exactly why they were chosen to move up the ranks, as well as being selected as the commandant. And they're extremely comfortable telling their story and clearly explaining their personal story and how it gave them a path to the top, and how their personal belief set are intrinsically linked to the direction they're going to steer the Corps. As cut and dried as that sounds, they're the best storytellers I have ever heard. So leaders need to develop and control their story. They need to create their own narrative, just like the general officers of the Marine Corps, and like them, it needs to be incredibly authentic. Shy is not an option. If you want to be invisible, go back to the lab. So, our job, your job, is how do you help them discover their inside story? And so, to me, it's like any strategic exercise. It's an introspection. It is an analysis, and it leads to somewhat of a creative leap. So, rather than have a work session about it for fun, Michael and I decided to do one as an example of a famous national leader. And so we thought we'd go with Indra Nooyi of PepsiCo. So I met Indra while presenting her an employee value proposition and a creative proposition to popularize it. And she loved it and saw the value of both the strategy and the creative handle that could carry the message. She had been a CFO, but I'm telling you, she is a marketer at heart and a great communicator. So now, separate from our work, so I'm not taking any credit for what I'll show, she had already crafted a story for herself, for her other stakeholders, but there was clear relevance to her people. And for the fun, I've just architected it in our Four Truths, Peter Guber's Four Truths matrix. So, I'm sure many of you know about Pepsi. It's incredibly competitive. People, I consider it, the scholar-athlete sorority, your fraternity. It's the ones that have crossed the finish line once before and want to do it again. It's that kind of organization. If you think about Indra and the leadership she had, she's incredibly driven and competitive, but has a conscience. And you certainly know her background coming out of India and really the amazing path it took her to get to the head of this Fortune 100 company. And the moment is obviously one of incredible pressure, societal pressure and political pressure against their product portfolio. So she, essentially was talking about a mission of just being a good company. And they captured that in a phrase called performance with purpose and articulated it in a matrix like this. And so this performance with purpose became something that she personalized and took and would tell stories and bring out of why this mattered, why it was true, and where she grew up in India, and why it's important in the world. And it was incredibly genuine and authentic to her. And then she had and her team had kind of 4 pillars that she could talk to about that specific theme, because it still is Pepsi that has to hit quarterly numbers, but obviously human sustainability from a customer standpoint, the environment and their impact, and then of course talent. So this is as much about her and where she came from as in her drive to beat the odds, as much as Forbes now referring to her as one of the most influential women in the world. And I've met her; she's a force. And as I like to say at the time, I said to her, what I found most interesting about that phrase, it wasn't performance and purpose, as if we'll compromise a little bit in both to accomplish each one of them and make progress on each one of them. She said, no, here's the standard today, now we have a higher standard. It's going to be performance like we always have with purpose. And when I said that to a number of people, because I don't think people had kind of considered the difference between the and the with, they just said, that's Indra. Or they said, that's Mike. Or at Apple they say, well, you know, that's Steve. And with General Amos, they'd say, yeah, that's him. All authentically them. So for Indra or any leader, she needs to know the tenets of her own story and how it's compatible, logical, and relevant with the company's story. Then create a narrative that's born of their past, that's repeatable and clear for people to follow. Employees, you guys know this better than I do, they want direction and a sense of alignment with the top. And I like to say, in every company, there's a string of connectedness from the CEO to every employee. And the length of that line determines the strength of the company. And it's really your job to continually shorten that string. So I'm going to launch a business idea that JWT Inside is thinking about, and afterwards you'll tell me if it's a really dumb idea. And I talked to Peter about this, so because I need Peter Guber, I need his help, because if you don't have a little Hollywood glitz, you know, how are we going to attract the attention of our CEOs? So I shamelessly admit that. So I want to create something called the JWT Inside Storyteller Camp. And imagine us in LA. We have some friends from UCLA here today. So imagine it much sunnier and drier than it is today. And the first thing in advance, we do two things before we invited the CEOs to a week-long camp in Los Angeles. The first would be a deep dive to interrogate the business and to develop what the organization, the leadership underneath the CEO agrees is that DNA, is the EVP of the company. But then working as well with his or her staff, we would do a forensic dive into their past. Answer the questions around who she is, how she got where she is, what motivates her, interview the board members that selected her, and people who have worked with her to know how she leads. And then during the course of the camp, use various techniques with the CEO to uncover her personal outlook on her role, her strengths or weaknesses, passions and plans for the company, and help to extract any of those reservations they have about letting, you know, actions speak louder than words. And then we'd find out what her favorite film was, and we'd get the writer of that film to sit through the workshop with the CEO and to complete that 4 truths exercise and lead to a single idea and kind of a manifesto or narrative that would be the best representation of her vision and the kinds of pillars of that story that everyone could kind of grab a handle on. From that simple set of tenets becomes the talking points people can believe in and adopt. Emerging from that can be tools for HR, PR, IR to expound the story, but most importantly, it gives clarity of purpose and message for the management team to help her lead the company and also to help propagate, you know, new legends that come out of that. So if it's your job to shorten the string of connectedness between leadership and every employee, you have to help them find their narrative. It has to be authentic. It has to be relevantly tied to the company, and their stories have to be intertwined with one clear aspiration. But remember the word story. PowerPoint isn't a story. A story, frankly, isn't a story until it's been retold. And ideas aren't retold unless they're true to the teller. You know, they connect to, oh, I'm behind on my slides. That was a kind of cool move, but we'll pass on that. But if they're really true to who she is and who the company is, and if it is really reflective of what the audience needs to hear and what's true about the organizational culture, and then you include in that what's happening right now, what's true in the world right now. Indra would certainly not have come and Roger Enrico, didn't worry about obesity when he was running PepsiCo. So performance with purpose was very much about the times, and not just in the United States, all around the world. You may be familiar with some of the attacks they had in Europe, especially in the UK. So that unfolds maybe an evolving mission. And I love the simplicity of, hey, we just want to be a good company. And we want people to consider us a good company. They believe that would have a tremendous effect on all of their stakeholders, the street, regulators who open up their opportunity for new plants, and so on. So that larger purpose is really crucial, and the connectivity between that individual and that larger purpose will be so apparent. You know it. You know it when you see someone speak, and you know it's really coming from here and not from the PowerPoint. And it's in everyone. It isn't about Steve Jobs. It isn't about the limits of founders, because there have been so many companies that have succeeded and great leaders who've been wildly successful and on the cover of whatever your favorite business magazine is. It's because they've been able to make that connection. So the steps: determine the inside story, investigates the boss's inside story, architect a matrix that intersects the two, create opportunities for the boss to amplify these, and last, arm the next level of leaders with the boss's inside story. It's just like making a cake. Good luck with that. No, thank you very much, and appreciate it. So I'd be delighted to answer any questions under the proviso that there's a low expectation for the quality of the answer, because it won't be prepared. But are there any questions? Either I made no. Oh, I have one. I knew it. I knew I would. Yes. Can we up the mic, please? By the time it gets there. There we go.
I guess the question is not even completely formed in my mind yet, but it has something to do with it has something to do with the fact that companies these days seem to be more at risk, or organizations in general seem to be more at risk of small things that can have a very large impact. I mean, when you're in social media, the most negative thing can go viral within a couple of seconds, literally. So if you are advising a CEO and they have an incident like the Marines had recently, which was a pretty disastrous thing. I think everybody pretty much knows about it. I was talking about the 4 Marines who urinated on a Taliban member, and the following PR disaster having to do with the burning of the Quran. These types of things happen to companies. It just happens. Yeah. So what advice do you have to CEOs that would help them get their company through a period like this? I mean, it could be BP.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I got it. So, and I think you picked an excellent example, and certainly an organization I'm very familiar with. And I think there are really 2 answers, as much as I'd love it to be one simple one. As it relates to the Marine Corps and the 2 stories that you identified, first of all, when companies have exceptionally strong cultures, and I think exceptionally strong cultures that are led by clarity of purpose, and not just vision of the business strategy, but real purpose of the organization, those incredibly strong cultures can withstand, because I worry first about what happens inside. So if you have an incredibly strong culture, those attacks won't penetrate and completely deteriorate the ability of the company to function. And the Marine Corps have an incredibly strong culture, and a part of that culture is if something goes wrong, their answer is always the same. That is not going to be tolerated, and that will be addressed. And I'm telling you, when those guys look at you, it's like an eagle. You ever look at an eagle? Jesus, that's scary. And they stare into the closest camera and say, we will determine that problem, and we will eliminate that problem. And you believe them, and it's the strength of the culture, and it's the strength of their history, and that's I think, one fundamental way that companies can address that attack. I think stepping out of maybe my speech, but if someone asks me a question, I'll answer it. I think BP is a great example, and Johnson & Johnson is one of the other famous ones. When a problem, emerges, and social media I was with Transamerica yesterday, and I think they were identifying an example from their parent company in Holland. So Transamerica is owned by Aegon, and right as the decline hit, someone had pirated the Twitter account at Aegon, and they just had this technology that kept repeating the same tweet that was getting repeated to anybody who was following it over and over that said, Aegon's going out of business. Good morning, CEO, hi, have you seen Twitter? What's Twitter? So obviously, but when you get those kinds of attacks, the first thing is to address the problem, whether it's a real problem, like what happened at J&J, because if you address the problem, you're part of the answer. Does anybody like baseball? A little bit? How about the Boston Red Sox?
Boo.
Her hand was up, though. Did anyone see it? That was a trick. Oh. This is our fight. I just slid that right in there while your hand was up. So the Boston Red Sox have some pitchers who got in trouble at the end of last season because during the games they weren't pitching, they went upstairs to the clubhouse and got a beer and some fried chicken. And this was starting to leak out, and there were 3 pitchers, and one of them, who's become a friend of mine named John Lester, immediately went to the press and said, yeah, we were doing this, and this was wrong, and I'm devastated by what happened at the end of the season. By addressing the problem, he was part of the solution, and the off-season chatter was all about Josh Beckett and the other 2 pitchers who hadn't talked about it. John was part of the solution, and the other guys were part of the problem until this week's start of spring season. Another year where the Red Sox will be attacking my friends across town in the Bronx. This is the kind of culture we have in JWT Inside. It's very loving. But I hope that answered your question. Any others? It's been my pleasure.
Hey, Rob, one quick thing I think that I'd like you to touch on is that me, you, and Mike have talked about how Inside and TNS can really partner in terms of a lot of companies here have great data in terms of engagement data, and then potentially how we can help with communications to kind of infuse that and help that and grow that. And while you're here, I think it would be great for people to hear your point of view on that.
Okay.
Not to set you up.
So, I apologize because I kind of have to answer it, but it's the promoter asking me to promote. But so what I'd rather do, because I'm not quite as shameless, but I'll tell you just briefly about what we spoke about a year ago when we had our session. So TNS is a massive research company. The TNS global entity, like the JWT is a brand agency, the TNS major entity does corporate reputation and consumer insight research around the world. They similarly acquired a business that was Mike's business in the employee research business that was and the 2 of them together have created this incredibly powerful engine around the world that we'd love to partner with, because we know if we do work for clients, people get tired of marketing communications. Like, oh, maybe it's time to change that. With the power of data behind us, we know what's working and what's not, and as it starts to improve, the value of our contribution retains, and so it's a great way for us to sustain our relationships and for us to demonstrate the value that we, intuitively believe brings to an organization. So a year ago, we met with a number of your colleagues, and maybe some of you here, to talk about data and how data is compartmentalized in organizations. So HR owns the employee data, PR owns corporate reputation data, and marketing owns consumer insight data. And ne'er the 3 shall intersect, and it just, because I sit across a couple of these different, I'm looking at it going, well, this is insane, because I know that what the corporate reputation study tells has a huge impact in the pride of our people and the attractiveness of the company to come and work. And of course, I know that the engagement study can have great insight into how we're serving our customers. And if I look at the customer insight and find out what aspects of product or service satisfaction is linked to employee behavior, if I link those 2 and I reward our people for those positive behaviors that have the greatest return on it. I like research. Am I getting carried away? So if I can somehow intersect those three businesses, those three research groups, and finally get those three organizations who generally don't talk to each other except, hi, how you doing? What does he do? I think she's HR. What is he? I think, corporate. Oh, that's the PR guy. And there was only one company that said we do that today. Do you remember who it was? It was Citibank. And I knew you'd remember it. Don't you hate asking someone when they give you a dopey look and they're like, oh, sorry. I knew you'd remember it because it was a fascinating story, so you don't forget. And the story was that as the market tanked and the company looked on the verge of collapse, do you remember the stock was just about $1? Raise your hand. Did you buy any of that stock? Anyone? One guy. You didn't? Liar. You did. How could you not at least spend $1,000 to buy 1,000 shares? Like, would your life really be changed today if you didn't have that $1,000? You might you might be driving to Florida instead of flying, but it wouldn't have, but we didn't do it. We thought it was going to go away. Isn't that amazing? Citibank. I'm not going to put $1,000 for 1,000 shares. So what happened inside the company? They completely, I think they locked the doors and put chairs in front of it, and all the leadership team got in there together with their backs to each other, waiting for the doors to get broken down, and they said, look, we have to work together like we never have before. We've got to figure this out, and it's got to be totally comprehensive and cohesive, and we're going to start from our people, then we're going to go out to our most important customers, then we're going to go out to the world, and we're going to knock these over sequentially and build our way back and grope our way out of this very, very deep hole, and we have to lock together. And at that point, you didn't see any more senior leadership people leaving. They actually collaborated, and I bet you dollars to donuts they're back in their separate silos today, and they probably don't even remember each other's names. Maybe not. Maybe I'm a cynic, because it's a big company, and that's what happens in big companies, and it's just dopey, but that's, what do I know? I'm just a star-eyed optimist, so. Am I done? Anything else? I am done. Thank you very much.